If you look across a broad swath of business history in all kinds of different industries, from computers to retail to steel, what you find is that leading companies fail to stay atop their markets. What's more, these are companies that were widely lauded by analysts in the business press, and yet they missed something important that precipitated their downfall. Now, it's tempting to jump to conclusions, and many have, that really this is a problem of technological complexity. The technology is just too hard for us to understand. Or, the one I also like to hear, that I hear a lot about, is this is just managerial incompetence. Instead, we've been studying this problem for a long time, and what we've come to a framework that helps us think about this problem in a different way. Okay, so we've seen this happen in wave after wave of industry. And what we've done is we've done research on the steel industry and many other industries, and what we've done is we've inducted a model of this process, which we call the process of disruptive innovation. And this model has three core principles, okay? The first principle is that in many markets, the pace of technological progress actually outstrips markets' demand for higher performing technologies. And the idea is that firms can overserve the market by producing ever more rich products with features and functionality than customers need, which leads a gap at the lower tiers of the market, again, between the performance required by customers and that provided by firms. And that gap is what creates the opportunity that enables new entry. Okay, so for example, you've probably seen this is the new Gillette razor. This is the Gillette Infinitum ad nauseum with 22 blades, right? Talk about overshooting the market. The second principle here is that there's a strategically important distinction here between different types of innovations that emerge in industry. And by innovations, I mean both technological innovations and business model innovations. Now, the most common of these is what we call sustaining innovations. They improve products and services along dimensions of performance that mainstream customers care about and that major markets have historically valued. Here, it's about doing it better, right? Providing the fifth blade to your razor, making the picture on your TV ever clearer, providing better cell phone reception. And these types of innovations are important because they are what allow companies to produce better products and services so they can sell more of those products and services to their best customers at higher margins and higher profitability. Now, the other type of innovation is what we call disruptive innovations, and what makes them, they're a little bit more rare, but what makes them so vexing, kind of from an incumbent firm and from an incumbent manager standpoint, is that they tend to be initially inferior on historic performance dimensions, but they offer some sort of novel mix of product features and functionalities, and they appeal to a fringe customer group. So, for example, they may be smaller, they may be cheaper, they may be more accessible, they'd be more convenient, okay? And again, if that's all they were going to be, then we would call them a niche product and we wouldn't worry that much. But what we worry about is when people produce something that's inferior, but is on a trajectory of improvement that is eventually going to intersect with our customers' needs that we actually care about. So in the case of steel mini mills, they offered an initially inferior product in terms of quality of steel, but the rebar market was interested in buying it because it was so dang cheap. Okay? The third principle here is that existing customers and established profit models constrain firms' investments in new innovations. Okay? Incumbents are typically motivated to pursue disruptive innovations. Why? Because they promise lower margins, they target smaller markets, and frankly, they're oftentimes things that the company's existing customers actually aren't very interested in. Okay? So the way to think about this is, if you are a startup and you have no customers, when you do get a customer who's willing to pay you for your product or service, they're a very interesting customer to you. Whereas if you're an incumbent and you already have a lot of customers, you start differentiating between those customers on which ones can I serve the most profitably versus which ones are sort of less profitable for me. Okay? So here's the model. So in every market, there's some sort of performance trajectory that customers can utilize or absorb. And in general, that's probably increasing over time. So I like to think about this as the microprocessor speed of your computer, right? Depending on if you're somebody like Professor Ratty, who talked earlier, you're going to use your microprocessor a lot because you're doing major intensive work trying to understand those big data sets, using a lot of computing power and so forth. But if you're somebody like me, you're using it for basic word processing, simple spreadsheets. Nonetheless, this is sort of capturing the needs of the average consumer. Okay? Now what happens is, following the pace of technological progress, incumbents offer better and better products and services, right? They're moving up the sustaining curve, they're producing these better sustaining innovations for their best customers, eventually overshooting the market. And what we found in our research is that in the case of sustaining innovations, incumbents nearly always win. But again, in the case of disruptive innovations, which are initially inferior on these historic performance dimensions, but offer a novel mix of product features, they're worse, customers aren't interested in, but they're on a trajectory of an improvement that eventually intersects with the mainstream customer in that market. And in the case of disruptive innovations, entrants nearly always win. Okay? So to crystallize the intuition a little bit, I'm going to give you an example from that's a little bit more recent, of an industry that many of us know pretty well, on how disruptive innovations can actually unseat leading incumbents. Okay? So we have the video rental industry in the late 1990s, sort of very fragmented industry, lots of mom and pop shops, and basically what these are doing is they are allowing you to come in and rent a movie for a fee. All right? Now, the market leader is Blockbuster. Blockbuster has this unique insight that movie rentals are an impulse decision, right? We're going to get a new movie for movie night. And at the time here, 70% of the US population lived within a 10-minute drive of a Blockbuster. And they were experiencing record growth and actually record profitability in 2002, which coincidentally happens to be the year that Netflix goes public. Okay, so Netflix, if you remember, initially they launched as the home delivery of DVDs through the mail business. They had a website, search engine, queue of movies, and if you remember their first introduction, their first service, it was pretty bad. All right, and most importantly bad for Blockbuster's customers is it took 3 to 5 days to get your movie. Well, that's not very interesting to me, right? I want to get my movie on movie night. But it did appeal to some fringe customer groups. In this case, people who were early adopters of DVD players and didn't have any DVDs to play on them, people who were indie film or independent film aficionados, people who were more geographically isolated, so they didn't live within that 10-minute drive of Blockbuster, and then people who just preferred to shop online versus shopping in the stores. Okay? Now again, if that's all Netflix was going to be, then it's a niche product. But to make it truly disruptive, it has to be on some sort of trajectory of improvement. And indeed it was. Netflix, by honing their operations over time, they improved rapidly, and they got to the point where they could reach 90% of their subscribers within one day. Now, all of a sudden, your value proposition is a little more interesting here. They offered convenience, value, selection, and if you compare the business models between the two companies, that's the real kicker. So if we compare the business model between Blockbuster and Netflix, we have Blockbuster, which has 5,000 stores and all the leases that entails and all the people working in those stores, versus Netflix with no stores. You have Blockbuster, for whom new releases, that is, new movies that just were released from the theater, constitute 70% of their rentals, versus Netflix is actually 30%. You have Blockbuster that has a local inventory, so they're buying 100 copies of a new release that they can keep for 3 weeks. It has a 3-week shelf life, versus Netflix, which can get by with 30% less inventory because of statistical pooling that they can pool across the country. And then, of course, all of our favorites when we actually shopped at Blockbuster were late fees, which constituted 10 to 15% of Blockbuster's revenues. And, of course, Netflix didn't offer any late fees. So we can sort of, given this trajectory of improvement and these differences in business models, we can sort of predict what's going to happen here. And indeed, this is the Blockbuster in my hometown. It was a very sad day for the McDonald family, but nonetheless very predictable.